The winter rain hammered against the glass walls of the 42nd floor, each drop like a reminder of promises left unfulfilled. Mr. Harrison sat alone in his corner office, the city sprawling beneath him like a constellation of forgotten dreams. The mahogany desk before him held no family photos, no personal mementos, just the cold steel of success that had once meant everything and now felt like nothing at all. He was 58 years old, worth $300 million, and utterly hollow inside. The empire he had built in the financial world stood as a monument to his ambition. But tonight, like every night for the past 3 years, it felt more like a mausoleum. His reflection in the window showed a man who had aged decades in mere years, his once dark hair now silver, his eyes carrying the weight of a grief that never lessened, only settled deeper into his bones. The office around him was immaculate, sterile, a perfect representation of the life he had constructed after David died. Everything in its place, nothing out of order, no reminders of the chaos that love and loss could bring. 3 years ago, this same office had been filled with laughter. David would come here after school sometimes, spinning in the leather chair while Harrison finished his calls, asking endless questions about numbers and deals and why Daddy worked so late. The boy had been 10 years old, with eyes that sparkled with curiosity and a smile that could light up even the darkest board meeting. Harrison remembered how David would practice his basketball shots using a small hoop mounted on the back of the office door, the soft thud of the foam ball against the wall becoming the soundtrack to their afternoons together. Those were the golden hours when the weight of running a financial empire seemed insignificant compared to helping his son with homework or listening to his excited recounting of playground adventures. The memory pulled him back to that last Sunday in March, 3 years and 4 months ago. They had been in the backyard of their Westchester home, the early spring sun, casting long shadows across the basketball court Harrison had built for David's 8th birthday. The boy was dribbling his old basketball, the leather worn smooth from countless hours of practice, the seams beginning to separate in places. David had been practicing his free throws, his small frame barely able to get the ball to the rim, but his determination unwavering. Harrison watched from the patio, pretending to read financial reports, but actually mesmerized by his son's persistence. After missing his 15th consecutive shot, David had flopped down on the concrete, frustration written across his young face. Harrison set aside his papers and walked over, sitting cross-legged beside his son. The boy looked up at him with those impossibly large brown eyes and said he wished he had a real basketball, one like the professionals used with proper grip and weight. Harrison ruffled his son's hair and made a promise that would haunt him forever. He told David that for his 11th birthday, just 2 weeks away, he would buy him the best basketball money could buy, a genuine leather Spalding NBA ball, the kind the stars used in Madison Square Garden. David's face had transformed with joy, his earlier frustration forgotten as he jumped up and started dribbling again, this time narrating his own imaginary game commentary. He pretended he was in the NBA Finals, with seconds left on the clock, the crowd on their feet. Harrison watched his son's performance with the kind of pure happiness that only a parent knows, the simple pleasure of seeing your child's dreams take flight in their imagination. That evening, as they walked back into the house, David had stopped and hugged his father tightly, whispering that he was the best dad in the world and that he couldn't wait for his birthday. But 5 days later, David woke up with a headache. Harrison, rushing to prepare for a crucial merger meeting, barely glanced up from his phone as his son complained of feeling dizzy. The nanny assured him it was probably just a minor bug. Children got sick all the time. By afternoon, David was running a high fever. By evening, he was in the emergency room, doctors rushing around with faces that spoke of grave concern before their words did. Bacterial meningitis, they said. Aggressive. Advanced. The words hit Harrison like physical blows. each medical term another step away from the life he had known just hours before. For 6 days, Harrison lived in that hospital room, watching machines breathe for his son, holding David's small hand and whispering promises about basketball and birthdays and all the tomorrows they would share. He told the unconscious boy about the basketball he had already ordered online, how it was being shipped overnight, how they would practice together every single day once he got better. But David never woke up. On the 7th day, the machines fell silent, and Harrison's world ended with the flat line of a heart monitor and the devastating quiet that followed. The funeral was a blur of dark suits and whispered condolences, people telling him that David was in a better place now, that time would heal his wounds, that he was young enough to start over. The basketball arrived the day they buried his son, delivered by a cheerful courier who had no idea he was bringing a father's greatest regret, wrapped in brown paper. Harrison had held that basketball for hours, feeling its perfect weight, running his fingers over the genuine leather grain, knowing that David would never touch it, never dribble it, never make the game-winning shot he used to dream about. In the months that followed, Harrison threw himself into work with a ferocity that worried even his most ambitious colleagues. He closed deals that others called impossible, expanded his company into new markets, acquired competitors with ruthless efficiency. But success felt like ash in his mouth. He moved out of the Westchester house, unable to bear the sight of that empty basketball court, and into a sterile penthouse apartment in Manhattan where nothing reminded him of his former life. The basketball sat on his bedroom dresser, a constant reminder of his failure as a father, the promise he would never be able to keep. Now, 3 years later, Harrison stared out at the city below and wondered how many other broken promises lay scattered in the streets below, how many other fathers were sitting in empty offices, haunted by the echoes of children's laughter. He had been working late again, not because the work required it, but because going home to that empty apartment felt like walking into a tomb. The rain continued its relentless assault on the windows, and Harrison finally gathered his things, knowing that sleep would be as elusive tonight as it was every night. The elevator descended in silence, stopping at the parking garage where his driver waited with the usual professional courtesy. But tonight, Harrison dismissed the man, choosing instead to walk through the city streets, hoping the cold rain might wash away some of the weight he carried. He walked without direction, his expensive overcoat quickly soaked through, his Italian leather shoes splashing through puddles that reflected the neon signs of the city that never slept. It was pure chance that brought him to the corner of 5th and 42nd, pure coincidence that made him look up at that exact moment to see the small figure pressed against the toy store window. The child was perhaps 10 years old, wearing clothes that had seen too many winters, his breath fogging the glass as he stared at something inside with an intensity that made Harrison stop walking. The boy's dark skin glistened with raindrops, his thin jacket clearly inadequate against the December cold, but he seemed oblivious to his discomfort, completely absorbed by whatever had captured his attention in the brightly lit store. Harrison found himself drawn closer, his heart beginning to race as he saw what held the child's focus. There, displayed prominently in the window, was a premium basketball, the same model that sat untouched on his bedroom dresser. The leather gleamed under the store's fluorescent lights, the official NBA logo clearly visible, the kind of ball that serious players used, the kind that David had dreamed of owning. The boy pressed his small hands against the glass, his lips moving in what Harrison realized was a prayer or perhaps a plea, spoken to the basketball as if it might somehow hear him and find its way into his arms. The child's words were barely audible through the glass and the rain, but Harrison caught fragments of the whispered conversation. The boy was promising the basketball that he would take care of it, that he would practice every single day, that he would never let it get worn out like his current ball, which Harrison now noticed tucked under the child's arm. It was a sorry sight, that old basketball, its surface so worn that the original color was impossible to determine, held together with duct tape and determination. The boy told the ball in the window about his dreams of playing for his school team, about how the coach said he had potential but needed better equipment to really develop his skills. Harrison stood frozen in the rain, watching this scene that seemed ripped from his own memories. The intensity of the child's longing, the way he spoke to the basketball as if it were a friend, the pure hope radiating from his small frame despite his obvious circumstances, it was all achingly familiar. This boy was the same age David had been, with the same passionate love for the game, the same dreams spinning in his young mind. But this child was alone on a cold city street, while David had had a father who promised him the world and failed to deliver even a simple basketball. The words escaped Harrison's lips before he could stop them, spoken to his own reflection in a nearby storefront window, barely audible above the sound of the rain. "My son died before I gave him one." The phrase hung in the cold air like a confession, like an admission of the guilt that had been eating him alive for 3 years. He had watched his son die while a basketball sat in a delivery truck somewhere, had buried his child, knowing that he had broken the most important promise he had ever made. And now here was another boy with the same dream, the same hope, standing in the rain and asking the universe for what Harrison had the power to provide, but had once failed to deliver when it mattered most. Without conscious thought, Harrison pushed open the door to the toy store, the warm air hitting him like an embrace after the bitter cold of the street. The store was nearly empty at this late hour, just a bored-looking teenage employee behind the counter, playing with his phone while soft Christmas music played from hidden speakers. Harrison walked directly to the basketball display, his wet shoes squeaking against the polished floor, his expensive suit dripping steadily as he selected not just the ball from the window, but the most expensive basketball in the store, a genuine leather Spalding NBA ball that cost more than some people made in a week. The teenage cashier looked up with surprise as Harrison placed the ball on the counter, pulling out his wallet with hands that trembled slightly. The boy asked if he wanted it gift-wrapped, and Harrison almost laughed at the absurdity of the question. How do you gift-wrap redemption? How do you package a second chance? Instead, he simply told the cashier that he wanted the ball delivered to the child outside, explaining that it was from an anonymous admirer, someone who believed in dreams and wanted to help them come true. The teenager looked confused but shrugged, clearly accustomed to the eccentric requests of wealthy New Yorkers. Harrison paid in cash, adding a generous tip for the inconvenience, and then positioned himself across the street where he could watch through the rain-streaked windows of his own memories. He stood there in the downpour, his $3,000 suit ruined, his carefully styled hair plastered to his head, and waited to witness something he had never been able to give his own son, the moment when a promise about a basketball was actually kept. The store employee emerged with the basketball, approaching the child who was still pressed against the window. Harrison watched as confusion, then disbelief, then pure, explosive joy played across the boy's face. The child took the ball reverently, holding it like it was made of precious metal rather than leather, his smile so brilliant it seemed to light up the entire storefront. The employee explained about the anonymous gift, and the boy looked around wildly, searching for his benefactor, his eyes passing right over Harrison, who stood in the shadows across the street. Then something magical happened. The boy hugged the basketball to his chest and began to cry. Not tears of sadness, but of overwhelming gratitude, the kind of emotional release that comes when a dream you never really believed would come true suddenly materializes in your hands. He spoke to the ball, thanking whoever had given it to him, promising again that he would take care of it, that he would practice every day, that he would make whoever gave it to him proud. It was a moment of pure innocence and joy, untainted by the cynicism and disappointment that life eventually brings to everyone. Harrison found himself crying too, standing in the rain like a lunatic, tears mixing with the water streaming down his face. For the first time in 3 years, he felt something other than the crushing weight of guilt and regret. Watching this stranger's child receive the gift that his own son never could felt, like a kind of absolution, a way to honor David's memory while healing something broken inside his own soul. The boy eventually disappeared into the night, clutching his new basketball and his old one, probably heading home to share his miraculous fortune with whoever waited for him there. But Harrison couldn't simply walk away. Over the following days, he found himself returning to the neighborhood, drawn by a compulsion he didn't fully understand. He learned that the boy's name was Jamal, that he lived with his grandmother in a small apartment 6 blocks from the toy store, that his parents had died in a car accident 2 years earlier, leaving him in the care of an elderly woman who worked 2 jobs to keep them afloat. Jamal spent most afternoons at Washington Square Park, practicing on the public courts with a dedication that reminded Harrison painfully of David. Harrison began to visit the park regularly, always in the afternoons when Jamal would be there, always dressed in simple clothes that disguised his wealth and status. He would sit on a bench with a newspaper, pretending to read while actually watching this remarkable child transform his raw talent into something approaching skill. Jamal had natural ability, but no technique, no understanding of the fundamentals that separate passionate amateurs from true players. Harrison, who had played basketball in college before business consumed his life, recognized the potential and the gaps in the boy's training. The first time Harrison spoke to Jamal, it was to offer a simple correction about foot positioning during free throws. The boy was missing shot after shot, growing frustrated with himself, and Harrison couldn't remain silent any longer. He approached casually, like any old man who had played the game in his youth, and suggested that Jamal try positioning his feet differently, shoulders square to the basket. The advice worked immediately, and Jamal's next 3 shots swished through the net perfectly. From that moment, an unusual relationship began to develop. Harrison never introduced himself by name, never explained who he was, or why he spent his afternoons watching a 10-year-old boy practice basketball. To Jamal, he was simply the old man who sat on the bench and occasionally offered helpful tips. To Harrison, Jamal became something he had thought lost forever, a connection to the joy and purpose of guiding a young person toward their dreams. Day by day, Harrison's coaching became more involved, though always subtle, always framed as friendly suggestions rather than formal instruction. He taught Jamal how to dribble with both hands, how to pivot properly, how to read the defense and anticipate rebounds. He shared stories about famous players and legendary games, speaking with the passion of someone who truly loved the sport. Jamal absorbed every word, every lesson, with the intensity of a boy who understood that this knowledge was precious, that having someone care enough to teach him was a gift in itself. The transformation was remarkable. Within weeks, Jamal went from a raw but enthusiastic amateur to a player with genuine skill and basketball intelligence. Other kids at the park began to take notice, including him in their games, respecting his improved abilities. Harrison watched from his bench as Jamal's confidence grew along with his skills, the boy's natural leadership qualities emerging as he helped younger children learn the basics of the game. But it wasn't just Jamal who was changing. Harrison found himself looking forward to these afternoon sessions with an anticipation he hadn't felt in years. He researched coaching techniques, studied game footage, even bought books about youth sports psychology, all so he could be more helpful to this boy who had unknowingly become his lifeline back to caring about something. The guilt over David's death didn't disappear, but it was joined by something else, a sense of purpose that made getting up in the morning feel worthwhile again. Winter gave way to spring, and Harrison's afternoon visits to the park became the most important part of his day. His business still ran smoothly. His investments continued to grow, but for the first time since David's death, Making money felt secondary to something more meaningful. He began to understand that his connection with Jamal was healing something fundamental inside him, that mentoring this boy was allowing him to be the father he had always meant to be but had lost the chance to become. Jamal's improvement caught the attention of the community center basketball coach, who invited him to try out for the local youth league. The boy was nervous about the tryouts, worried that his skills wouldn't measure up to kids who had been playing organized basketball for years. Harrison spent extra time with him that week, working on specific drills and techniques, building his confidence while trying to contain his own nervous excitement about how Jamal would perform. The tryouts went better than either of them had dared hope. Jamal not only made the team, but was selected as a starter, his combination of natural talent and recently acquired fundamentals impressing the coaches. Harrison wasn't at the tryouts, couldn't risk being seen as more than just a friendly old man from the park, but Jamal found him the next afternoon and excitedly shared the news. The boy's joy was infectious, his gratitude touching, and Harrison felt a pride that rivaled anything he had experienced in his business career. As Jamal's first season progressed, Harrison found ways to attend games without drawing attention to himself. He would sit in the back of the gymnasium, just another anonymous spectator, watching this child he had come to care about flourish on the basketball court. Jamal's improvement continued at an almost miraculous pace, his game intelligence and fundamentals setting him apart from his peers. The local newspaper even ran a small article about the promising young player who had emerged seemingly from nowhere to become one of the best athletes in the youth league. But Harrison's greatest satisfaction came not from Jamal's athletic success, but from watching the boy's character develop. Jamal became a leader on his team, encouraging struggling teammates, showing younger players the techniques he had learned, embodying the kind of sportsmanship and integrity that Harrison had tried to instill through their informal coaching sessions. The boy was becoming not just a better basketball player, but a better person, and Harrison felt a deep satisfaction knowing he had played a role in that development. The season culminated in a championship game that would determine the league winner. Jamal's team had fought their way through the playoffs, with Jamal emerging as their best player and emotional leader. Harrison arrived at the gymnasium early, finding a seat in the upper bleachers where he could watch without being conspicuous. The building filled with parents and siblings, coaches and community members, all there to support these young athletes in their moment of glory. The game was everything a championship should be, back and forth, with lead changes and momentum swings that kept the crowd on their feet. Jamal played brilliantly, but so did several players on the opposing team, creating a contest that remained undecided until the final minutes. With 30 seconds left on the clock, Jamal's team trailed by 2 points, and their coach called a timeout to set up one final play. Harrison watched from his seat in the bleachers, his heart pounding as if he were the one about to take the court. During the timeout, Jamal looked up into the stands, his eyes scanning the crowd until they found Harrison's familiar face. For just a moment, their eyes met across the crowded gymnasium, and Harrison saw something in the boy's expression that took his breath away. It wasn't just recognition, it was gratitude, a wordless acknowledgement of everything they had shared over the past months, all the afternoon sessions in the park, all the patient instruction and encouragement that had brought Jamal to this moment. Harrison gave the slightest nod, a gesture so small that no one else would have noticed it. But Jamal smiled and turned back to his teammates with renewed confidence. The timeout ended, the players took their positions, and the final 30 seconds of the game began to tick away. The ball was inbounded to Jamal, who dribbled calmly up the court, showing none of the panic that might be expected from a 10-year-old boy in such a pressure situation. With 15 seconds remaining, Jamal drove toward the basket, drawing the defense to him before passing to a teammate for what should have been an easy scoring opportunity. But the pass was deflected, and the ball rolled loose near midcourt. Jamal reacted fastest, diving to retrieve the ball as the clock showed 8 seconds left. He had no choice but to take the shot himself, from well beyond the three-point line, farther than most players his age would even attempt. Harrison held his breath as Jamal rose up for the shot, his form perfect, incorporating every technique they had practiced together in those countless afternoon sessions. The ball arced through the air with perfect rotation, the gymnasium falling silent as hundreds of people watched its flight toward the basket. Time seemed suspended as the ball reached its apex and began to descend, the scoreboard showing 2 seconds, then 1, then 0, as the ball swished through the net for a three-pointer that won the championship. The explosion of noise that followed was deafening, teammates mobbing Jamal at center court while the crowd erupted in celebration. Through it all, Harrison sat quietly in his seat, tears streaming down his face, watching this boy he had come to love like a son experience the kind of triumph that David had dreamed about but never lived to achieve. It was a moment of pure joy, unmarred by the complicated emotions that had defined Harrison's life for so long. As the celebration continued on the court below, Harrison quietly made his way toward the exit, not wanting to intrude on Jamal's moment with his teammates and coaches. But before he could leave, he felt a small hand grab his arm. He turned to find Jamal, still holding the game ball, his face streaked with tears of joy, his championship medal hanging around his neck. The boy didn't say anything at first, just wrapped his arms around Harrison in a hug that conveyed everything words couldn't express. Finally, Jamal stepped back and looked up at him, his young face serious, despite the celebration continuing around them. He told Harrison that he had known for months, that the old man wasn't just some random person who happened to enjoy watching basketball. He said he didn't know exactly who Harrison was, but he understood that this man had changed his life, had believed in him when he barely believed in himself, had given him not just basketball skills, but confidence and hope. Harrison knelt down to Jamal's level, his own emotions threatening to overwhelm him. He told the boy how proud he was, not just of the game-winning shot, but of the young man Jamal was becoming. He said that teaching him had been the greatest privilege of his life, that watching him grow and succeed had healed something inside him that he thought was permanently broken. They stood there together in the emptying gymnasium, an unlikely pair brought together by grief and hope, by basketballs and second chances. That night, Harrison sat in his penthouse apartment, but for the first time in 3 years, the silence didn't feel oppressive. He took David's basketball from the dresser, where it had sat untouched, holding it gently as he thought about the journey that had brought him to this moment. The guilt over his broken promise to David would always be part of him, but it was no longer the only thing he felt. He had found a way to honor his son's memory while building something new and meaningful with Jamal. He thought about the irony of it all, how his greatest failure as a father had somehow led to his greatest success as a mentor. David would never get his basketball, would never make his game-winning shot, would never know how much his father had loved him. But through Jamal, Harrison had learned that love doesn't end with death, that the capacity to care for and guide young people doesn't disappear just because your own child is gone. He had discovered that being a father isn't just about biology, it's about choosing to invest in a young person's future, about believing in their potential when they can't yet see it themselves. The relationship with Jamal continued to evolve over the following months and years. Harrison never revealed his true identity, never explained about David or the broken promise that had started it all. To Jamal, he remained simply the old man from the park who had believed in him and helped him become a better player and person. But their bond deepened into something that transcended simple coaching, becoming a form of chosen family that benefited them both. Jamal continued to excel in basketball, eventually earning a scholarship to a prestigious high school known for its athletic programs. Harrison attended every game he could, always sitting in the same section of the bleachers, always ready with the encouraging nod when Jamal looked his way. The boy's success on the court was matched by his achievements in the classroom, where the discipline and work ethic Harrison had helped instill served him well in his academic pursuits. But perhaps most importantly, Jamal began to pay forward what he had received. He started volunteering at the community center, teaching basketball fundamentals to younger children, many of whom came from difficult circumstances similar to his own. Harrison watched with pride as his unofficial protege became a mentor himself, passing on not just basketball skills, but the kind of hope and encouragement that could change a young person's trajectory. Years passed, and the informal mentorship between Harrison and Jamal evolved into something that neither of them had expected, but both treasured. They never spoke directly about their arrangement, never acknowledged the unusual nature of their relationship, but both understood that they had saved each other in ways that went far beyond basketball. Harrison had found a way to be the father he had always meant to be, while Jamal had gained the guidance and support that every young person deserves, but not everyone receives. The culmination of their journey came during Jamal's senior year of high school at the state championship game that would determine whether his team advanced to the national tournament. The stakes were higher than they had ever been, the pressure immense, but Jamal had grown into a young man capable of handling whatever challenges came his way. Harrison sat in his usual spot in the bleachers, now in his mid-60s, his hair completely white, but his eyes bright with the kind of vitality that comes from having found purpose again. The game was a classic, the kind of contest that people would remember for years to come. Both teams played with extraordinary skill and determination, the lead changing hands repeatedly as the clock wound down toward the final moments. Jamal, now the team captain and undisputed leader, played with a maturity and composure that impressed everyone in attendance. He had grown into not just an exceptional athlete, but a remarkable young man, the kind of person who made everyone around him better. With less than a minute remaining, and his team trailing by 1 point, Jamal found himself in almost the exact same situation he had faced in that Youth League championship years earlier. The ball was in his hands, the game on the line, hundreds of people on their feet watching his every move. But this time was different. This wasn't a desperate heave from a 10-year-old boy hoping for a miracle. This was a seasoned player executing a play he had practiced thousands of times, drawing on years of experience and instruction to rise to the moment. Harrison watched as Jamal sized up the defense, his movements calm and deliberate despite the chaos around him. The boy he had first seen pressed against a toy store window was now a young man, capable of controlling the biggest moment of his high school career. With 15 seconds left, Jamal made his move, driving toward the basket with perfect technique, drawing defenders and creating space exactly as Harrison had taught him all those years ago. But instead of taking the shot himself, Jamal made a pass that no one in the gymnasium saw coming, threading the ball through traffic to a teammate who had been overlooked by the defense. It was a moment of pure basketball intelligence, the kind of play that separates good players from great ones. The teammate caught the ball cleanly and scored just as the buzzer sounded, giving Jamal's team the victory and earning them a spot in the national tournament. As his teammates celebrated around him, Jamal's eyes immediately went to the bleachers, searching for the familiar face that had been there for every important moment of his basketball career. When he found Harrison sitting quietly in the midst of the celebration, their eyes met across the crowded gymnasium one more time. But this look was different from all the others, deeper and more meaningful, a recognition not just of this moment, but of the entire journey they had shared. Jamal raised the game ball slightly, a subtle salute to the man who had helped make this moment possible, and Harrison responded with the same barely perceptible nod he had given years earlier. It was a private moment of acknowledgement and gratitude, invisible to everyone else in the building but profound in its simplicity. In that exchange, Harrison finally felt the peace that had eluded him since David's death. He had kept his promise after all, just not in the way he had originally intended. The weight of guilt that had pressed down on him for so many years didn't disappear entirely, but it was finally balanced by something equally powerful, the knowledge that love and guidance can transcend even the deepest loss. He had failed to give David the basketball he had promised, but he had given Jamal something even more valuable, the belief that dreams are worth pursuing and that there are people in the world who will help you achieve them. As the crowd began to file out of the gymnasium and the celebration moved to the locker room, Harrison sat alone in the bleachers for a few more minutes, reflecting on the miraculous journey that had brought him to this moment. He thought about David, about the promise that had haunted him for so long, and realized that his son would have understood what had happened here. David would have been proud of what his father had done, proud that his death had somehow led to another boy's dreams coming true. The last image Harrison carried with him as he finally left the gymnasium was of Jamal surrounded by his teammates, holding that game ball and wearing a smile that could light up the world. It was the same smile David used to have when he talked about basketball, the same pure joy that all children deserve to experience when their dreams start to become reality. And in that moment, Harrison understood that some promises can be kept even after it seems too late, that love finds a way to honor its commitments even when the original recipient is gone. The saga of the last basket had come full circle, from a father's broken promise to a stranger's fulfilled dreams, from devastating loss to redemptive hope. Harrison walked out into the night air, no longer the hollow man who had stood in the rain outside that toy store years earlier, but someone who had learned that the deepest wounds can sometimes become the source of the greatest healing, that in helping others find their way, we often discover our own path to peace.